Hey guys, I'm Jose and this is tutorial number 3 on Rhino Python. Today we're going to see repetition and different kinds of loops that we can use here in Python. So I have already opened the Rhino Python editor. So we're going to start by importing Rhino script syntax right there as rs as usual. And we're gonna start with a for loop, right? What is a for loop? A for loop is a structure that allows us for repeat things many times. So we're gonna see how it's written, and then we're gonna just explain what is in there, right? So we're gonna say for I, a variable I would be defined in the for loop, in range, and range. It's quite an interesting function inbuilt in Python, so we're going to see what that means. And we're going to say 0, 100, right? And we're going to put 2 points here. So this will allow to build everything that we do inside the for loop would be repeated 100 times in this case. Notice that we are using indentation as specifying what is happening inside the for loop. We could specify anything here, and then eventually if we continue without that indentation, we will be outside the for loop. So that's the way in which Python actually recognizes what is happening inside the for loop. So there's no parentheses that will determine that. Let's do something very simple, like rs.add point, right? And we're gonna do a point so let's specify the position of a point. You could say 0, 0, 0. The problem with this line is that we will actually do a point, like 100 points in the same position, right? So how can we actually make points in different positions? We're going to use the variable I to just make a point in the position that we are generating with this new variable I, and then in the loop, right? So let's run that and see if this is working. Right. So you can see now that we've generated 100 points, and each one of them is 1 unit apart from the next one, right? That's pretty good. And I'm going to go back to the Python editor. And I want to explain a little bit of what is this function range here. Let's do something called myList equals range from 0 to 8, right? And then we're gonna say something like print myList. We're gonna just, for this, just by typing this hash symbol, we can comment out this line, so this won't happen. But what we're doing here is just printing the variable myList, that is a variable generated out of this range. So let's see what that gives us. Oh, we've got an error here saying unexpected indentation. Let's remove this. Right. So what we got here is the following. Range is generating a list. We can see that by the square brackets between 0 and 8. So it starts in 0 and it's before 8. So it doesn't include 8. So it's 8 elements as total, right? So this is a very neat function to actually produce a list. So what we are doing in the for loop is just going from each element in this list generated in this range function, right? So that's quite important to understand. Let's do something else. Like range allows us to do something like, for instance, 2, meaning this is the beginning of the list, this is the end of the list, without being included, of course, and this is the step. So we'll see that we will, in this case, we are jumping. So we're jumping every, the number 1 is omitted, number 2 is included, number 3 is omitted, 4 included, and so forth, right? So this is the step for the range. This is the same structure that we could use in the range inside a for loop, right? So that's the understanding of what range is actually doing. So I'm going to remove that just to make clear of what the range function is doing. So let's go back to our for loop, and we could do a little bit something a little bit more exciting here. What if we want to just do something like some undulation, maybe some sine wave? Well, we cannot really put something like sine wave of I right away, because we would get an error, right? There's no module sine. So there's a few things that we could do. We could say import math as m, for instance, and we would be able to access sine wave by typing m dot and the module, right? Sine. That would work. But often you want to be able to access those math methods without having to call the m for math, right? So you could say from math import, and this will import all the methods from the math library. So you won't need to specify this m now to make this work. So let's see that. Right. So we're generating something that undulates, like, or it's an oscillator between this point and this point, right? But obviously it doesn't become too interesting. Let's put I here as well in Y and see what happens. Great. So what we generated now, it's a sine wave function for describing the position of the points, and we can see that the points are moving in the y direction, while in x they are oscillating with the sine wave, right? So fairly straightforward. We start seeing how to incorporate some of these math functions in order to kind of build sequences. The second kind of for loop I want to show today, it's a for loop that it's slightly different. So it's the while loop, right? So we're going to just comment this out, and we're gonna do a while loop. For the while loop will actually do exactly the same thing, but it's written in a different way. So we're gonna say, first of all, I equals 0. So we start specifying what I is. Second is while I smaller than 100, and dots, right? We specify the same function. In this case, I'm gonna just copy the method at point, the same thing. If we run this now, this function would run forever, so don't, right? We need to specify one more thing. We need to specify how I is updated. We're gonna say I is plus equals 1. What does plus equals mean? This means like whatever I is, add 1 to it. So the first time around, I will be 0, and we will generate a point in 0. Then we will get to this line, and I will become 1. And we will keep increasing I, and we will keep repeating this function while I is smaller than 100. So this is like already like something that we will see in the next tutorial, that it's a conditional statement. It's kind of evaluating a condition. And if this condition is true, we are actually executing this bit of code. So that's, we're going to see if this works. Well, we should have got rid of these points first, right? So let's look at it now. So it works exactly the same. It's doing exactly the same operation than the for loop, right? So these are the two main ways in which you will be doing repetition. I recommend, I'm more used to using for loops because they're more described in a way of what is the n number of steps that it will have. The while loop, it's quite interesting because it's more behavioral. You could have stuff going on and repeating it, but in a way it's more dangerous as well, because you could actually run into eternal loops and produce crash your computer or crash the program, right? So it's your choice. Both are very interesting. You could just decide what to use. And in the next tutorial, as I mentioned, we're going to see how to do if statements.